The galaxy had known peace for centuries, with the stars shimmering in quiet harmony, but all of that changed in an instant. The Dragon Warriors, an ancient and ruthless alien race, had awoken from the depths of an uncharted sector of space. Their ships were massive, their warriors nearly invincible, and their thirst for conquest was endless. No one had seen them coming, and now they were sweeping across the galaxy like a wildfire, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. The Galactic Federation, the peacekeeping force that had governed the galaxy for generations, was caught off guard. As political infighting weakened the Federation, their defenses crumbled. Star systems were falling one after another, and the people of the galaxy could only watch as the Dragon Warriors unleashed their fury. Amid this chaos, Captain Derek Lawson stood at the front lines. He was a man of few words, but his reputation echoed through the galaxy. An experienced soldier, Lawson had seen the horrors of war and survived countless battles. His tactical brilliance had saved entire fleets, and many had come to rely on him for guidance. Yet even he was troubled. This new enemy was unlike anything the Federation had ever faced. Lieutenant Jenna Carter was part of a young and inexperienced team of soldiers. She had joined the military to protect her home and defend the innocent, but she quickly realized that war was far more brutal than she had ever imagined. Her first battle had been a nightmare. She had watched in horror as Dragon Warrior ships decimated Federation forces, their weapons far more advanced than anything humanity had. The Dragon Warriors were fierce and relentless. Every battle felt like a losing cause. The human soldiers were outmatched, their technology lagging far behind the advanced weapons of the Dragon Warriors. Every day, humanity seemed to be pushed further back with no end in sight. Jenna had heard the stories about Captain Lawson. She had heard how he had single-handedly turned the tide of battles, how his strategies had outsmarted enemies who seemed invincible. But she had never seen him in action. Now, as the Federation prepared for a final confrontation in the heart of Dragon Warrior space, she found herself facing the reality of war and wondering if even Lawson's genius could save them. The human forces had gathered for one final stand. The Federation had no choice but to face the Dragon Warriors head-on. If they didn't, their world would be lost. Yet, even with all their firepower, the situation looked bleak. The Federation's fleet was vastly outnumbered and morale was at an all-time low. But Captain Lawson wasn't giving up. He stood tall in front of his crew, calm and collected even in the face of disaster. He had seen worse odds before. He had fought in battles that had seemed hopeless, and he had come out victorious. Now, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, he was ready to fight again. "Listen up," Lawson's voice echoed across the room. "We're facing the hardest fight of our lives. The Dragon Warriors are strong, but they're not invincible. They have a weakness, and we're going to find it." Jenna, standing at the back of the room, couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Lawson's confidence was contagious. She had always thought of him as a legend, a man whose skills were beyond compare. But now, standing in front of him, she saw a leader, a soldier who understood the weight of the situation but refused to give in to fear. "Follow my lead, and we'll break their grip on this galaxy," Lawson continued. "We'll use what they don't expect, our minds. We can't beat them with brute force, but we can outthink them. The Dragon Warriors are used to crushing their enemies. They're overconfident, and that's where we'll strike." The room grew silent as the crew absorbed his words. There was no room for doubt now. If they were going to survive, they would have to trust Lawson and his plan. It wasn't about strength or firepower. It was about using their brains to find a way to win. As the Federation fleet prepared to launch its assault, Captain Lawson turned to Lieutenant Carter. "You'll be part of a special team," he said, his voice firm but reassuring. "Your mission is critical. We need to infiltrate the Dragon Warrior flagship and disable their command systems. If we can cut off their leadership, the rest of their fleet will fall apart." Carter's heart raced. The thought of infiltrating the enemy's flagship was daunting. But she knew this was their only chance. Lawson was asking her to trust in her abilities and in his leadership. The stakes couldn't be higher, but there was no turning back now. As the fleet prepared to engage, Lawson gathered his team together. The battle was about to begin. The Dragon Warrior fleet loomed in the distance, a terrifying sight. Their ships were enormous, dark and jagged like the creatures they were named after. The Federation's fleet was smaller, but it had something the Dragon Warriors didn't: unity. Every ship in the Federation fleet had one goal: to protect their people and stop the Dragon Warriors from taking over their galaxy. Captain Lawson stood on the bridge of the lead ship, his eyes scanning the screens in front of him. The battle was imminent. The Dragon Warrior ships were closing in fast, their weapons ready to unleash destruction. But Lawson remained calm. He knew the enemy's tactics. He knew what they would try to do, and he was ready. "We'll hit them where it hurts," Lawson said, his voice steady. "Form up and prepare to engage. Remember, we fight smart, not hard." The Federation ships moved into position, their engines roaring as they prepared to launch their attack. The first volley of fire came from the Dragon Warrior fleet, massive beams of energy shooting across the stars. The Federation fleet returned fire, but their weapons seemed insignificant compared to the power of the Dragon Warriors. "Brace for impact," a voice shouted across the comms as the ships shook from the blast. But Lawson didn't flinch. He was already calculating their next move. As the Federation ships spread out, Lawson's plan took shape. They wouldn't engage in direct combat with the Dragon Warriors. They would use their speed and agility to their advantage. By darting in and out of the enemy fleet, they could create confusion and disrupt the Dragon Warriors' tactics. But there was something more, something Lawson had been keeping secret. He knew the Dragon Warriors had a weakness, a blind spot in their defense that most didn't know about. He had studied their tactics, observed their behavior in battle, and now he was going to use that knowledge to his advantage. "Now," Lawson shouted, his voice filled with purpose. The Federation fleet surged forward, dodging blasts as they weaved between the larger Dragon Warrior ships. For a moment, the Dragon Warriors were thrown off balance. It was the opening the humans needed. As the enemy scrambled to regroup, the Federation struck with precision, but this was only the beginning. The true challenge lay ahead, as Captain Lawson and his team prepared to carry out their most dangerous mission yet, infiltrating the Dragon Warrior flagship. They knew that the fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders, and the real battle was just about to begin. The battle raged on in the cold depths of space. The Federation fleet was giving its all, striking back against the Dragon Warriors with all the power they could muster. But Captain Derek Lawson wasn't in the heat of the front lines anymore. His mission was different. It wasn't about guns or lasers. It was about strategy, tactics, and using the one advantage humanity had over the Dragon Warriors: their ability to think on their feet. As the Federation ships darted around the enemy, Fleet Lawson was overseeing a mission that could change everything. A small team of elite soldiers, including Lieutenant Jenna Carter, had been selected to infiltrate the Dragon Warrior flagship. Their goal wasn't just to survive or fight. They were there to sabotage the heart of the enemy's command structure, to strike at the core of the Dragon Warrior's power. Jenna felt the weight of the task pressing down on her. She had been part of many missions before, but this one was different. It wasn't just about survival. It was about victory. The Federation needed this, and Lawson believed that they could win. But how? The Dragon Warrior flagship was one of the most heavily guarded ships in the galaxy, bristling with weapons and alien technology. And yet Lawson's confidence never wavered. He knew they could do it. He had seen worse odds before and had always found a way through. "Ready, Lieutenant?" Captain Lawson's voice broke through her thoughts. Jenna snapped to attention. "Yes, Captain, I'm ready." Lawson nodded, his eyes calm but full of purpose. "Remember, we're not just soldiers. We're the last hope the Federation has. This isn't a battle of strength, it's a battle of wits. The Dragon Warriors are strong, but they rely too much on their power. They underestimate us, and that's where we strike." Jenna nodded, trying to shake off the nerves that had settled deep inside her. She had always admired Lawson from afar, hearing stories of his strategic genius and his calm under pressure. But now, she had to be more than just a soldier. She had to think like him. She had to be clever, resourceful, and fearless. The small team of soldiers, equipped with stealth suits and high-tech gear, prepared to board a Federation stealth ship that would carry them into the heart of enemy territory. As the ship's engines hummed to life, Jenna's thoughts raced. The Dragon Warrior flagship was a fortress in space, its defenses nearly impenetrable. But Lawson had a plan that didn't rely on raw firepower, but on clever tactics and understanding the enemy. "You'll follow my lead," Lawson said, his voice steady as ever. "We'll split up once we board the flagship. The main objective is to disable their command center. That's where their power lies. If we can take that out, the rest of the ship will fall apart." The Dragon Warriors have no backup systems. If we break their command, they'll be lost. Jenna listened intently. Lawson wasn't just giving orders, he was teaching. This was what made him different from other commanders. He didn't just lead, he made his soldiers think, adapt, and act. It was no wonder that the stories about him were legendary. The stealth ship drifted closer to the Dragon Warrior flagship, its sleek form hidden in the shadows. The team readied themselves. They were about to step into the unknown, into the heart of enemy territory. Every decision, every movement would have to be precise. There could be no mistakes. The ship docked with the flagship, and the team silently filed out, moving like shadows through the dark corridors of the enemy vessel. They wore suits that blended them into their surroundings, making them nearly invisible to the Dragon Warrior's sensors. Every step had to be careful, every sound muffled. One wrong move, and the entire mission would fail. "Stay focused," Lawson whispered as they moved deeper into the ship. "The Dragon Warriors are good, but they're arrogant. They think they're invincible. They rely too much on their technology. We can exploit that." Jenna couldn't help but admire how Lawson's mind worked. He was always thinking ahead, always analyzing every possible angle. She was still learning from him, still trying to understand how he could be so calm, even in the face of certain danger. The team approached a massive door that led to the heart of the flagship's command center. The doors were reinforced, a wall of metal and energy fields. But Lawson wasn't intimidated. He studied the structure for a moment, analyzing the patterns of energy that powered the door's defenses. "They're relying on brute force," Lawson muttered to himself. "But that's their mistake." He turned to his team. "We'll disable the power to the door, using their own systems against them. Watch for a split second of vulnerability. Then, we move." Jenna held her breath. This was it. The plan had to work. There was no room for failure. The Dragon Warrior forces were already closing in, their fleet circling like predators. This was their one chance. As the power flickered and the doors' energy fields momentarily flickered off, Lawson moved swiftly. With a quick motion, he activated the override device that would temporarily disable the door's defenses. The door hissed open, revealing a dark, expansive room filled with alien technology. "This is it," Lawson whispered. "We split up. Jenna, take the control panel on the left. Disable their communications. The rest of you follow me." Jenna nodded and moved to the left, her heart pounding. She couldn't afford to think about the dangers. She had trained for this moment for years. She focused only on the task at hand. Disable the systems, cause chaos, and create an opening for the team. As she worked on the console, she heard the soft click of footsteps behind her. The rest of the team was doing their part, breaking into different sections of the room, hacking into the Dragon Warrior systems. But the minutes stretched on, and the longer they took, the more exposed they became. She could hear the distant sound of footsteps, the clanking of Dragon Warrior armor. They were coming. "Almost done," she muttered, her fingers flying across the console. But just as the last command was entered, the door slammed shut behind her, and the lights flickered. A deep voice echoed through the chamber. The Dragon Warriors had discovered them. "Time's up," Lawson said, his voice calm despite the danger. "Fall back now." The team scrambled, but Jenna couldn't help but feel a twinge of doubt. They had done their job, but the battle wasn't over. They were far from safe. The Dragon Warriors were coming, and their mission wasn't finished yet. "Stay close," Lawson ordered. "We make our own escape route." As they ran, the ship shook around them, warning lights flashing. But in that moment, Jenna felt a strange sense of trust in her captain. He wasn't just leading them to victory, he was teaching them how to think, how to survive. If they were going to make it out alive, it would be because of the wisdom he had shared with them. And with that, they moved forward, facing the unknown, trusting that they would survive, because they had one thing that the Dragon Warriors could never understand: human ingenuity. The Federation's mission was far from over. As the team sprinted through the dark, labyrinthine corridors of the Dragon Warrior flagship, the tension was thick in the air. The attack on the command center had gone off as planned, but now they had a bigger problem: escaping alive. Jenna Carter's heart was still pounding from the close call with the Dragon Warriors. The door had slammed shut just as the team had finished disabling the communication systems. They had successfully crippled the flagship's ability to communicate with the rest of the Dragon Warrior fleet, but now they were trapped inside, with no clear way out. The ship's interior was a maze of hallways and chambers, each one more dangerous than the last. They needed to move quickly. Move, Captain Lawson ordered, his voice calm but urgent. Jenna didn't need to be told twice. She was already running, her boots echoing on the metallic floors as the rest of the team followed close behind. She could hear the low growl of Dragon Warrior foot soldiers not far behind, their footsteps growing louder. The alarm had been triggered, and it wouldn't be long before they were swarmed. "We need to get to the extraction point," Lawson continued, his eyes scanning the path ahead. "There's a hidden dock at the far side of the ship. We'll use it to escape." The hidden dock was a risky choice, but it was the only option they had left. The Dragon Warriors controlled the entire flagship, and every other escape route was blocked. The team had no choice but to trust Lawson's instincts. He was their best chance for survival. Jenna's mind raced as she ran. She'd heard the stories about Captain Lawson's legendary escapes, but this was different. This wasn't just about getting away. It was about outsmarting a superior enemy. The Dragon Warriors were powerful, but they weren't invincible. Not as long as humans like Lawson were still fighting. They reached an intersection of corridors, and Lawson held up his hand. The team stopped, crouching low against the walls to avoid detection. Lawson's eyes darted around as he considered their options. "We'll split up," Lawson said quietly. "I'll lead the rest of you down the side passage. Carter, you take the main route and draw attention. Get their focus on you and we'll make our move." Jenna's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. "Captain, are you sure?" she asked, unsure of what she was hearing. "You want me to be the distraction?" Lawson nodded firmly. "You're the fastest. You'll have the best chance of evading them. Don't worry, we'll be right behind you." For a moment, Jenna hesitated. The weight of the decision was heavy, but she had no time to second-guess herself. This wasn't the time for fear. If she wanted to be part of this mission, she needed to trust Lawson's plan. He had guided them through impossible odds before, and she couldn't let doubt hold her back now. "Understood," she said, her voice steady, even as her adrenaline surged. "Good, now go," Lawson ordered. With a final nod, Jenna broke off from the group and sprinted down the main corridor. Her heart raced as she ran, each step echoing in the empty hall. She could hear the Dragon Warrior soldiers' heavy footsteps behind her, their growls getting closer. They were already on her tail, but Jenna had trained for moments like this. She had to stay calm. Her breath came in sharp bursts as she pushed herself to run faster. She could almost feel the Dragon Warriors closing in. If she slowed down, they would catch her in an instant. She reached a series of doors and dove through the first one she saw, quickly shutting it behind her. Inside, the room was dark and empty, but there was no time to rest. She needed to keep moving. She heard the Dragon Warriors pounding down the hall, their voices booming with commands. They were getting closer. Jenna's mind raced as she searched for an exit. Her eyes fell on a narrow vent in the corner of the room. It wasn't much, but it was an escape route. She crawled through it as quickly as she could, her body scraping against the metal walls. She had to trust that the vent would lead her in the right direction. Meanwhile, Captain Lawson and the rest of the team had split off down a different passage. They moved with swift precision, their footsteps barely making a sound. Lawson led them toward the hidden dock, relying on his years of experience to navigate the complex ship. The team followed without question, trusting in their leader's calm demeanor. They knew that Lawson wouldn't let them down. "We're almost there," Lawson said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "Stay alert." As they approached the dock, the faint hum of the ship's engines grew louder. They were close now, but just as they rounded a corner, a Dragon Warrior patrol appeared in front of them. Lawson immediately signaled for the team to stop. "Stay low," he instructed. The Dragon Warriors didn't notice them at first, but their sharp senses would detect them soon. Lawson glanced at his team, then at the nearest door to the dock. It was their only chance. He motioned for the team to move as quietly as possible. They crept toward the door, but just as they were about to reach it, the Dragon Warriors spotted them. A shout rang out and the warriors charged. "Move!" Lawson barked, drawing his weapon and firing at the nearest enemy. The blast knocked one of the warriors to the ground, but there were too many of them. The team had no choice but to fight their way through. Gunfire rang out in the corridor as the Federation soldiers held their ground. Lawson's calm leadership kept them focused as they fought, each of them using the tactics he had taught them. The battle was intense, but they pushed forward, determined to reach the dock. Meanwhile, Jenna had crawled through the vent and emerged on the other side of the ship. She found herself in a maintenance area, hidden from the dragon warriors. She moved quickly, trying to find her way back to the team. She didn't have time to rest or regroup. She had to get to the extraction point before the dragon warriors overwhelmed them. Back at the hidden dock, Captain Lawson and his team were holding their ground, but they were running out of time. The dragon warriors were relentless and the team was beginning to tire. Lawson knew they couldn't hold off much longer. "Carter, where are you?" he said into the comms, his voice tense. "I'm on my way," Jenna's voice crackled back. "Hold on. Just get here, Lieutenant," Lawson said, his eyes scanning the corridor. "We need that extraction." The dragon warriors were closing in and the Federation team was outnumbered. But with Jenna's timely arrival, they would have one last chance to escape. The battle raged in the dimly lit corridors of the dragon warrior flagship. Captain Derek Lawson's team was fighting with everything they had, but the dragon warriors were overwhelming them. The Federation soldiers had fought bravely, but they were outnumbered. Each time they downed a dragon warrior, two more appeared. The fight was becoming desperate. Every second felt like an eternity, and Lawson knew they had to make their final move. "Stay together," Lawson shouted as he ducked behind a metal pillar to reload his weapon. The rest of the team followed his lead, finding cover wherever they could. The sounds of battle echoed around them, the crackling of energy blasts, the hiss of dragon warrior weapons, and the distant sounds of heavy footsteps getting closer. Lawson's heart pounded in his chest, but his mind remained sharp. He was thinking ahead, always a few steps ahead of the enemy. His years of experience had taught him that in war, it was not just about how much firepower you had. It was about strategy, timing, and knowing when to make a move. "Carter, you've got the door," Lawson said, glancing at Lieutenant Jenna Carter, who was crouched behind a nearby wall waiting for her moment. "I'll cover you." Jenna nodded without hesitation, her face set with determination. She had been trained for moments like this, but this was different. She wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for a cause, for the future of the Federation, and for her comrades. The Dragon Warrior Patrol was closing in on them, their alien armor glinting in the dim light. Jenna knew they couldn't afford to wait any longer. She took a deep breath and dashed toward the door, her footsteps echoing through the corridor. As she approached, she activated the override device that would disable the security lock. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Beyond it lay the hidden dock, their only escape route. The Federation's small stealth ship was waiting for them, but they couldn't get to it without a fight. "Go, Carter, now," Lawson shouted as he fired his weapon, covering her advance. Jenna rushed through the door and sprinted toward the ship, but just as she reached it, a massive explosion shook the ship. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and she stumbled but managed to stay on her feet. The blast had come from the Dragon Warrior soldiers behind them. "They were closing in fast. We need to move now," Lawson barked, joining her at the ship's entrance. He grabbed her arm and pulled her inside. The rest of the team followed close behind with one last volley of fire to keep the enemy at bay. Lawson slammed the door shut, and the stealth ship's engines roared to life. For a moment, everything was quiet, and Jenna let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. But they weren't safe yet. The ship lifted off from the dock, its engines firing as it shot through the Dragon Warrior flagship's lower decks. The massive ship's hull was still shaking from the explosion, and the feeling of imminent danger was overwhelming. The stealth ship was fast, but so was the enemy. "Brace for impact," Lawson ordered as another blast hit the hull, sending a shudder through the ship. The ship's shields held, but the impact was enough to rattle them all. Jenna grabbed onto the nearest seat, her knuckles white as she clenched the armrest. "Hold on," Lawson said, his voice calm as always, even in the face of disaster. "We're getting out of here." But the Dragon Warrior flagship wasn't going to let them go without a fight. The ship's massive weapons systems were targeting them now, launching blasts of energy that threatened to tear them apart. The stealth ship rocked as it swerved to avoid one blast, but another shot hit its port side, sending sparks flying from the control panel. "We've got damage," one of the crew members shouted, trying to stabilize the ship. "Shields are down to 40%. We need to make the jump now." "Not yet." Lawson shouted, his eyes fixed on the rapidly approaching exit. They were almost through. Just a little further and they'd be clear. But the Dragon Warrior ships were closing in and their weapons were charging up. Now, Lawson snapped. The pilot punched in the coordinates for the emergency jump, and with a jolt, the ship shot forward, the stars outside blurring into streaks of light as the ship entered hyperspace. The sound of the ship's engines whined as they accelerated into the safety of deep space. For a long moment, there was nothing but the silence of the ship's interior, broken only by the heavy breathing of the crew. They had escaped, but at what cost? "We made it," Jenna said, her voice shaking with exhaustion. "We're alive." Captain Lawson nodded, but his face was grim. He glanced around at his team, his eyes scanning each one of them. They had made it out, but they were far from safe. The mission was far from over. "We won this battle," Lawson said, his voice steady. "But the war is far from over. The Dragon Warriors are still out there. They'll come for us again." Jenna felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She knew Lawson was right. This victory had bought them time, but they couldn't rest yet. The Dragon Warriors would return, and next time they might not be so lucky. "We need to regroup," Lawson continued, his gaze intense. "Prepare for what's coming next. They won't give up, and neither will we. We fight on." Jenna looked around at the faces of her fellow soldiers. They were tired, bloodied, but not broken. Lawson's words had lit a fire in them. The team was ready to face whatever came next. They had a plan, and they had each other. But as the ship sped through the vast emptiness of space, Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that something even darker was waiting for them ahead. The Dragon Warriors had been defeated in this battle, but the true war was still unfolding, and the Federation's future was far from certain. The Federation stealth ship sped through the cold silence of space, the stars streaking by as they ventured further from the Dragon Warrior flagship. Inside the ship, the team sat in uneasy silence, each of them trying to catch their breath after the chaos they had just endured. The fight wasn't over, but they had won this battle. They had made it out, and they were alive. Jenna Carter leaned back in her seat, her hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline that still coursed through her veins. Her body ached from the long hours of running, fighting, and evading death. She glanced at her fellow soldiers, some of whom were nursing wounds, others staring off into space, lost in thought. The mission had been a success, but the cost of that success was still heavy on their minds. Captain Derek Lawson, however, seemed calm, as always. He had led them through the fire and come out the other side unscathed. But Jenna knew that behind his calm exterior, he was just as tired, just as worn out as they were. His eyes, though steady, were filled with the weight of what lay ahead. "Are we clear?" Lawson asked the pilot, his voice steady, despite the storm of thoughts that surely swirled inside him. The pilot nodded. "We're out of Dragon Warrior space. We're safe, for now." "For now," Lawson repeated, his gaze hardening. "We've bought some time, but we have to stay ready. The Dragon Warriors won't give up. We're in their sights now." The room fell into silence again, each soldier lost in their own thoughts. The Federation had won this round, but Lawson was right. The war was far from over. The Dragon Warriors had been dealt a blow, but their thirst for conquest was endless, and there was no telling how long it would take for them to regroup and strike again. Jenna shifted in her seat and looked over at Lawson. "Captain, what now?" she asked quietly. "What do we do next?" Lawson turned his gaze to her, his expression softening just a little. He had always been the one with the answers, the one who gave them hope when it seemed like there was none. But this time even Lawson seemed uncertain. The universe was vast, and the Federation had only just begun to understand the full scale of the threat they faced. "We rebuild," Lawson said after a moment, his voice resolute. "We prepare for whatever comes next. We train, we gather intelligence, and we wait for the Dragon Warriors to make their next move. They'll be back, but when they come, we'll be ready." Jenna nodded, though the weight of those words settled heavily on her shoulders. She had seen what the Dragon Warriors were capable of. She had fought alongside the best soldiers in the galaxy and barely made it out alive. Now they were being asked to prepare for another round of fighting. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about winning. "Captain," one of the other soldiers spoke up, a man named Sergeant Troy. "Do you think we're prepared for another battle like that? Do we have the strength to hold our ground?" There was a long pause before Lawson responded. He had always been a man of few words, but when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of experience. The strength we have isn't just in our weapons, he said quietly. It's in our minds, our ability to adapt. The dragon warriors may be stronger, but they're predictable. They rely on brute force, and they think that's enough. We'll show them that it's not. Jenna looked around at her team. There was fear in their eyes, but there was also a spark, a fire that hadn't been extinguished. They had seen how devastating the dragon warriors could be, but they had also seen what humanity could accomplish when it fought back. She could feel that same fire beginning to grow inside her. Lawson's gaze turned toward the viewport, his eyes fixed on the distant stars. This galaxy belongs to all of us, he said softly. Not just the dragon warriors, not just the Federation. Everyone. And as long as we stand together, we'll fight to protect it. Jenna sat back in her seat, her mind racing. Lawson's words were more than just a speech. They were a reminder of everything that was at stake. The Federation might not be the biggest force in the galaxy, but they had something more powerful than any weapon. The will to fight for what was right, for the people who couldn't defend themselves. The ship's comms buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Federation Command. Captain Lawson, this is Admiral Vargas. We've received word that the Dragon Warrior fleet has started regrouping. They're mobilizing for a counterattack, and we need you to lead the charge. Prepare for deployment in 24 hours. Jenna looked at Lawson, who nodded grimly. There was no time to rest. The war was far from over. We'll be ready, Lawson said simply, his voice as steady as ever. We'll fight for the future of this galaxy. The message ended and the room fell silent again. But this time there was a renewed sense of purpose in the air. The Federation was far from defeated. They were ready for the fight ahead. Get some rest, Lawson ordered. We leave in 24 hours. We'll need every bit of strength we have. Jenna nodded and stood, making her way toward the crew quarters. But as she walked down the narrow corridor, her thoughts were filled with the memories of the battle they had just fought. The dragon warriors were relentless, but they were not invincible. They had underestimated humanity's strength before, and now they had learned their lesson. Jenna knew that the Federation was ready to fight back. They had experienced soldiers like Captain Lawson, young recruits like herself, and an unbreakable will to survive. Together, they would stand against the dragon warriors and defend their galaxy. As she lay down on her bunk, Jenna closed her eyes. The war wasn't over, but she had seen something in her fellow soldiers, something that gave her hope. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something bigger, and no matter what the dragon warriors threw at them, they would fight until the very end.